we go from Saturday when we had potential Final Four or national championship previews on the table to tonight when we have a very big game in the Big 12 on Big Monday. Who better to talk to about it than Chris Spatola of ESPN and SiriusXM, former Duke assistant, West Point grad. Got to be feeling patriotic after the big golden goal by Jack Hughes yesterday, Chris. We'll get into hoops in just a second. I got to ask. I was mentioning just a moment ago, this felt like one of those big unifying moments we don't get a lot anymore in this internet era of everybody was together watching that and on the same page as far as Americans go.
Yeah, well, we don't get a lot of Love America moments either, to be frank, given where things are. Look, it's the magic of sports. I think it's the magic of timing. Again, given the climate we're in, I think we're trying to unify around something nationally here. And look, I think the magic of, those two teams, like the Four Nations tournament had sort of the same effect, of course, in the loss there, to come out on the win and obviously in overtime. And for it to be, there's 46 years to the day of 1980 and how unifying and magical that moment was. I still think the magic from that is still resonant even to this day, all these years later. So, what a special moment. Like you said, my background to wrap my head around anything that's, about how great this country is very cool.
Yeah. And Saturday night was a nice tune-up for Sunday morning. If you stayed up and watched hoops all the way out through the Iowa State BYU game, maybe you need an extra cup of coffee to get up Sunday morning to watch hockey. But let's start with Saturday afternoon at Fog Allen Fieldhouse, where that Jayhawks team hadn't lost a game like that at Allen Fieldhouse ever under Bill Self. Not that ugly. They melted down in the final 5 minutes against Cincinnati, Chris. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are on Kansas as they get ready to host another team that, as desperate as one can be for a win after a 2-game losing streak. The Houston Cougars come in trying to avoid their first 3-game losing streak in nearly a decade.
Yeah, I think it's been very hard for Kansas to know exactly who they are with Peterson in and out of the lineup. I think a lot of it for Darren Peterson, and this is just my opinion, because it's dicey when you're talking about potential injuries, et cetera. But I think there's also a lot of modern dynamics at play. Like, I think he and perhaps the people around him feel like he's already won. He comes into a game, he puts up numbers and can take himself out because the point's been made. I do think there's some of that pathology. I'm going to be the number one pick, so why do I have to continue playing? Which I think is obviously terrible. But I do think that's where they're at. Now, from the team dynamic, I think the impact we're seeing is there's a ceiling that Kansas has with Peterson in the lineup, and obviously that's their highest ceiling. They are at their best, and their best opportunity to win a national title is with Darren Peterson in the lineup. The problem is if he's going to keep playing these games, like we're less than a month out from Selection Sunday. So if you're Bill Self, it's not like you're shutting down for the NCAA tournament if Peterson can't go. You're still playing in that tournament. And for a coach like Bill Self, the regular season Big 12 titles are nice to have at this point in his career. Same with the conference tournament. This is about March. This is about winning in the NCAA tournament. And you get to a point where you're like, look, if you're not here, if this is where you're going to be in and out, we've got to start to develop the team that we're going to be a month from now. So I think that's the difficulty right now for Self is, look, if you're in, then you've got to be. If you're not, then we got to start figuring out who we are. And that's a real pickle that Peterson has put them in.
Yeah, it has me questioning just how far they can go. The more I think about it, I see Kansas having a hard time making it beyond, say, the Sweet 16 at best. Houston, who lost to Arizona on Saturday, like I said, is the team going into Allen Fieldhouse tonight. But this is as shaky as they've looked in a long time, Chris. And a lot of it, I think, has to do with the fact that they're built on great defense. They're built on forcing turnovers and winning in transition or on the offensive glass. And I think only forced 5 turnovers Saturday at home against Arizona. Maybe only had a handful of points off of turnovers. And that's a couple of games in a row now where they've run into that. Yes, great competition they faced in each instance, but it's the Big 12. Every game is a big game. You're facing somebody tough. So how does Houston get back on track tonight and avoid, like I said, the first 3-game losing streak in nearly a decade for them?
Yeah, your point is really spot on just about the ability to force turnovers and win the physical. That's what, like Houston, when they line up against you, they are trying to say boo and try to scare you. And most teams do. Like, they either don't have the talent to play out of the aggressive defensive schemes, the blitzing of ball screens and the trapping of the post and just the hellacious chaos that defense can produce. Most teams don't have the talent and they don't have the will to be able to stand up to that. But what we have seen this year with this version of Houston is teams that know it's coming and then have the talent to be able to withstand it. They're not just coughing up the basketball. Like, Houston has not been able to say boo, and all of a sudden here's the ball, and you can now score off of our turnovers. And we saw that in the second half of that game. I mean, Arizona was down 2, and they went on like a 12-0 run to go up 10 in a blink of an eye. Very unusual for this Houston team. The other thing about Houston, and I think it's a little bit we talk about their defense as we should, but one of the under talked about things about that team last year that we're not seeing this year is Houston's ability to score inside. Like, they had a little bit of a post-up game at times last year when they were playing through Juwan Roberts. They'd either throw it to him on a block or they could get some stuff offensively where he was, operating and could create for other guys. They just don't have that inside scoring presence. So the only thing they're getting from those guys is off of the offensive glass, obviously some defensive versatility, but they've become very perimeter reliant. They are shooting the ball well, but they're very perimeter reliant on Milos Uzan, Kingston Flemings, and Emmanuel Sharp to play well. And those 3 guys are good. It's one of the reasons that Houston has had as good a year as they've had. But offensively, especially if they can't create offense off of the defense, like you're just talking about, they don't have quite the interior presence. And that's the biggest difference to me between last year's team that played in the national title game versus this group this year.
Chris Spatola of ESPN and SiriusXM with us here on You Better You Bet. Chris Mack in for Nick Costos today here on Westwood One Sports. By way of getting us to a discussion about the Duke-Michigan game, how do you see those top 4 right now? How would you rank them? Duke, Michigan, Arizona, Houston.
Yeah, I have said for a while now that I think Houston's the best team because I think they have the fewest holes and they can beat you in a variety of ways, and they're not relying on making shots. I mean, they just don't have to take or make a lot of threes in order to put up 85 points in a game, which says a lot, and they can beat you with their defense. They have great size, obviously, and they won that game the other night without Koa Pete. So, assuming you get him back, they have tremendous size. Their guard play is gotten better and better and better. Jaden Bradley, to me, is the best point guard in the country. And then those young guys, whether it's Karchenkov or Burries, like those young players play well beyond their years. And so they have the fewest holes to me. And then I did not see Duke winning that game the other day. Like, they surprised me a little bit, and they surprised me mostly with how they guarded. Again, like you win games against the best teams in March with your ability to guard and your ability to rebound. And the fact that Duke won that game in the paint, the fact that they won on the glass as dominantly as they did, and the fact that they won, they're plus 10, plus 11 in the paint against that front line of Michigan says a lot. It just says a lot. So I would have Arizona. I'd have Duke. I'd probably still have Michigan there. And I'd have Houston. And I know Iowa State lost the other night, but I'd kind of put them in another category. And then a team to keep an eye on, the game I called on Saturday was Florida. Like, they're on that same trajectory they were last year, where they were a work in progress in November, December, early January, and then last year became a rocket ship by the end of the year. It's kind of flipped. Those 3 guards in their backcourt last year, all now in the NBA playing significant minutes. They got that front court back. That front court is very unique and one of the best nationally, and then their guard play is starting to get a lot better. So I would also throw Florida into that category of kind of those 5 or 6 teams.
So I don't want to. I have a question about Duke I want to get to, but I don't want to discount what Florida is doing because the dominance that they're showing some nights is incredible. Is there something to be said, though? We have this discussion, it feels like, every year going into the tournament about having to scratch and fight and claw your way through a conference like the Big 12, where, like I said, every night is an Elite Eight, Final Four level battle, it feels like. And what Florida is doing in the SEC, where, yeah, they're still playing quality opponents, but the SEC has much more of a, lack of a better way to put it, mushy middle, where Florida is really imposing their dominance, like I said, on some of those teams. For instance, Ole Miss, not a tournament team this year, but, they're taking teams like that. They're taking bubble teams, and they're just absolutely imposing their will on them. Is that a better way to head into March, into the NCAA tournament? Like, hey, we didn't have to kill ourselves for every W down the stretch before we got to the tournament.
Yeah, I think, first of all, I would go back, for example, to Duke last year. Now, I don't think this Florida team is as talented as that Duke team was. But my point is, the ACC last year got 4 teams into the NCAA tournament. Didn't really have an impact on that Duke team. But again, this Florida team's not as talented. Look, I think there's some to what you're saying. I think what you have to do is you've got to take a dive into how they're actually winning. Like, how are they winning these games? And I'm a believer that against the best teams in March, you have to be able to win the physical. And the physical comes down to your ability to defend in the half court. And again, a deeper dive, like how is Florida defensively? How are they guarding? Well, their ability to switch, and remember, they're playing a massive front line, and they're switching 1 through 5. So not to go all X and O here, though, but like that can translate no matter who you're playing. The ability to switch is one thing to switch. The other thing, to switch with size makes you that's a separator. And so I think that's one of the things. The other thing is they are by far the best rebounding team in the country. And that's another area where these games are won and lost on the backboard. And you could say, well, I just asked you, the SEC not playing as tough, which, look, it's still pretty good, but it's not obviously as good as it was last year. But the ability to rebound, I think, translates. And then I think the more to the point with Florida is the question of how good is their guard play? The adage of guards win in March, and there's a lot of truth to it. How good is their guard play? And that's why they're starting to play a lot better, and why I'm a little bit bullish with Florida is, the knock, well, they don't shoot it as well from 3. Well, they're shooting it a lot better over the last 2.5 weeks. But their starting backcourt's playing better. They have much more of an identity as a team. They're only playing 8 guys, and all 8 of those guys know who they are and what their role is, et cetera, et cetera. So your point's taken. I think there's something to that. But I think when you take a deep dive into how a team is winning and sort of what they lean on to win, I think I'm pretty bullish on Florida because of that.
This is great. Chris Spatola of ESPN and SiriusXM with us here on You Better You Bet on Westwood One Sports. Let me go back to what I wanted to ask you about Duke. A lot of people say you never want to be the guy that replaces the guy, but John Scheyer has done a great job of being the guy that replaced the guy. In your opinion, is he getting enough credit? Because we're seeing some of the stuff that he's drawing up out of the huddle where they're scoring off of inbounds plays, where guys are breaking wide open. Is Scheyer going to have to win a title for the average college basketball fan to look at him and say, yeah, this dude has actually stepped in and done as much as any one person could possibly do to fill Coach K's shoes?
Yeah, I mean,
it's a loaded question. I know.
No, it's not loaded. It's there's a lot there. In other words, like, yeah, I think ultimately to be compared, there's one thing to replace the guy, then there's another thing to replace Coach K. The greatest guy, arguably. So, yeah, and I think the other thing you have to factor into this discussion is the way in which they lost last year. Like, that was a meltdown. They should have been playing in that title game and would have had obviously a great shot to beat Florida. The way they lost to Houston with a team that, in hindsight, with the way that Cooper Flagg, Con Knipple, Sion James, Tyrese Proctor, with the way that all 4 of those guys in particular are playing now in the NBA, that team was perhaps a lot better than we even thought by the end of the year. So, yeah, I think there's a little bit of pressure there. But as you know, like in a tournament like that, like you can lose games like they lost to Houston. I think the most impressive thing to me about John, and a lot's been made about the innovation offensively. Obviously, he's recruited well. The thing that he has really bought into, and that's where that Duke team last year became really, really good by the end of the year, and it's where this team really, really surprised me the other day against Michigan and has gotten better over the course of the year, is John can really coach defense. I mean, like they got better as that game went on against Michigan. They held Michigan in the last 20 minutes of that game to 8 field goals. Their shell was really good. They do have the ability to do some innovative stuff defensively. Like that's where John, I think, has really, really excelled and maybe doesn't get talked about enough. So I look, he's won a lot of games. He's the fastest to 100 wins in the history of ACC coaches. So all of that's there. But the reason I hesitated is, I mean, you're at Duke. The guy you're following won 5 titles, and you're talking about a fan base that they expect national championships. And so I think that's a large part of his narrative. And I do, knowing John the way I do, I do think he feels that. And there's a pressure there to ultimately complete it.
Before we let you run, Chris, I only got about 45 seconds here, but give me one more team. We just talked about all the teams at the top of the ranks. Give me one more team that you really think is in a good spot with a couple weeks left in the regular season.
Yeah, I think UConn is, I know they've had some slip-ups here, but, that a DNA that has been there, especially a head coach. It's the same thing I would say. I would go back to Florida and make that point to sort of further the Florida discussion. A program that has been there and done it in that tournament, experience in that tournament matters. And I think this UConn team is built a lot like those teams that won a title. Now, the Big East not as tough, so your point about Florida and the SEC can probably be made about UConn, but UConn is going to be right there when it's all said and done, and so that'd be one of those teams I'd throw in there for you.
Great stuff, Chris. Appreciate the insight. Enjoy the last couple of weeks of the regular season. We'll hopefully talk to you again come tournament time.
No doubt. My pleasure. Thank you.